into VS Code. I think it shows up just a little bit bigger on the VS Code side. So we're gonna start a new file, and we're gonna call this CV. You know, let's just call it CV version 1 in case we do others. We may or may not do others. All right, so there's the code. What do you guys think? Anybody see anything jumping out at them or anything? Alan Valdez says, "Good job, ChatGPT. Looks like our code work is done." Yeah, maybe. Yeah. Remember, this is the blank screen effect that I have, right? You never want to start with a blank screen anymore. So yeah, it's given us a pretty reasonable code. Now, however, Alan, I think you said this is your first time joining. Remember that in other classes, we have seen ChatGPT make some mistakes, some very basic mistakes in some cases. So again, we're being editors. We can't just take it wholesale. We have to kind of still work it ourselves, right? But, you know, it's always good to just kind of just take a step back and just do like a smell test, right? Like this is what in software development you call a smell test. Does that code look good, everybody? Anything jumping out at people? Just give me your observations if there's any out there. There may not be any observations out there. That's okay. But let me know if there's anything jumping out at you. What do you guys think? What are we doing in this code? Think about all the stuff we've covered up to date in this book, right? Even in the other chapters. What are we doing? Alan says, does the variable get called after line 16? That's not a variable, Alan. That's not setting a variable. That's setting the parameter that's needed by cross-val score. So that's not a variable setting. That's setting a parameter. Good question, though. And you know what? In line 16, there's a lot happening in line 16. So if anybody wants to look at that and just give me your assessment. Like, does this pass the smell test? Ravindran says, can we add another model to compare the performance of both models? Yeah, of course, Ravindran. But walk before you run, right? We got to get the initial code base off the ground, right? And then we can make those adjustments. Right now, we're still kind of in a learning phase, right? What you're describing is a little bit more like a champion model process, which is great. I encourage that. You have to do that. But let's flesh this one out a little bit more, right? So look, Ravindran, let's build on your question. What model are we using now? What does the code tell us about that? And, you know, like Alan, what does the CV parameter represent here? Ahmad says, looks good. Okay. Anybody else? Or just give me your observations or anything that pops out at you. I see 1, 2, 3, 4 things that pop out at me in this code. I mean, generally, I agree with Hamad. The code looks good. I think this is runnable code. I think we can use this as a jumping off point. But you know, we gotta exercise our own abilities, right? We gotta make our own assessment and see if it passes the smell test. What do you guys think? Okay, great. Yassine, wonderful. Great observation. It's using the k-folds cross-validation. Yeah, that's exactly right. So Alan, coming back to your question, that's what the CV value is, right? The CV parameter. Amrapali says CV is the number of cross-validation folds you want. Yeah. Yeah, great. You guys identify that correctly. We're going to be using cross-validation, and it's going to be a k-fold, right? We know we're not going to be using leave one out. All right, so that's great. That's one of the 4 things that jumped out at me. What else, guys? Anything else jump out at anybody? You guys are doing a great job so far. Okay, Yassine says it's a classification problem. Yeah. What kind of classification problem? Okay, Ravindran. Ravindran basically just answered my question. We are using logistic regression, which does binary tasks. That is yes or no. That's right. That's right. So it's a classification problem, you know, between 2 classes essentially, right? So Yassine and Ravindran, you know, are both correct in that, and we're using logistic regression, right? So yeah, you guys did great on that. So the other thing that caught my eye is that we're using the iris dataset. I think most of you are going to be aware of this, but for those of you that are not, the iris dataset is a classic dataset in data science. Every student on the planet has used the iris dataset. And it's one of the datasets that's natively available within scikit-learn, so you can use it too. The authors also use the iris dataset in some of the examples in the ISL book, so you're going to come across that when you see mentions of iris. But iris is a classic dataset, so I'm glad to see that we're being exposed to it today. We're also the other thing that caught my eye is we're setting our X and Y, right? So we know that from our previous classes that X is going to be our independent variable and Y is going to be our dependent variable, so also known as our target variable. So you see the target being noted there. And yeah, and then the last thing that caught my eye was down here, right? This is where the rubber hits the road, right? The cross-validation score is where the actual execution takes place, right? That cycle, that 3-step cycle we talked about, here's the data, put it against the model. How did we do? That's where that's happening, all in line 16, right? So line 16, like, is the thing, right? And also where the heavy lifting is. So when we talked about like those CPU cycles, the computationally intensive side of data science, that's where it's happening, okay? Okay, so Ravindran says it gives calculations of recurrent events based on the input. Yeah, it's going to give us the metrics, sure. Yassine says, however, maybe ChatGPT has made a mistake because the iris dataset is more than 2 classes of my knowledge. Yes, you're right about that, Yassine. There are multiple classifications, but it all just depends on how you structure the data, right? But yes, we could be doing this for a multi-class, but let's keep it logistic regression for now, okay? But yes, I fundamentally agree with you. Ahmad says, we loaded the dataset of sklearn, which divided into X and Y, dependent the model, we will use logistic regression. Yeah, Hamad, that's a pretty good summary. Yeah, so I think that, so the bottom line is I think this is perfectly reasonable code, right? I expect that it will run. Nothing jumps out at me as being wrong. VS Code is not telling us we have anything that's blatantly wrong. So let's run it. All right, CV V1 PY is what we call this. So now we go back. Okay, and just in case you guys missed it, right? We're not using notebooks, right? We're using an IDE tied to our terminal. Again, if you need the code bigger or the terminal bigger, let me know. But we're going to make sure our file is there. We're in the right directory. I think we are. Yep, there's our file. So now it's going to be Python. Let's see what it says. So these are the scores it's giving us. It doesn't. It doesn't explain exactly what scores they are. I'm going to assume that these are accuracy scores. What do you guys think? Is that an effective output? Remember, this is the metric that we're measuring, right? Is this a good way to look at it?